the river, which then would be used as fertilizer for the farmland that was down here that the Nazis would use to actually make their crops to send out to the rest of the troops throughout Germany. The containers that you see on the far side are containers that were found by the Soviet Union after it was liberated by them. These are the containers that held the Zyklon B, which is essentially hydrogen cyanide. The hydrogen cyanide is used for, well, was originally used as a cleansing powder for all the prisoners who were coming into the camp. Dr. Joseph Mengele actually realized that the hydrogen cyanide could be formed to a tablet, and when mixed with water, it became a toxic gas that would suffocate any human being who was around it. So then the Zyklon B was produced in mass productions to send around to all the concentration camps, and then that was the way to mass exterminate the Jews and other people who were in the camps at the time. There's been a lot of talk about how the Holocaust never happened, and by me going to, especially me going to Auschwitz and being able to see this, I don't understand how anybody could say that. But this is just more examples that they have in Auschwitz. This is the very high top picture is the hair that they found in bags that the Germans kept, and then the Germans would force the prisoners to actually make into their clothing. They would force them to sew it together, make into their own clothing, their beddings, their pillows, everything. The next pictures of suitcases. There's hundreds of thousands of suitcases that were found and that were left by the Germans after they left Auschwitz, and that they put on display along with the hundreds of thousands of pairs of shoes that were left in Auschwitz. So these are just a few examples of what they had, and this is why I find it so hard to believe that anybody could say the Holocaust didn't happen, just from the amount of evidence that we have that it did. What the two pictures here on my right are the pictures of Rudolf Hess, who was the commandant of Auschwitz. This is his house. He lived in Auschwitz. He lived right next to where all this was happening. His wife and his 3 children also lived in Auschwitz with him. They were right next to the horse. Rudolf Hess was famous as saying that the reason that he kept his families there is because it would make his children stronger and make his children believe that they were the dominant race. He was teaching his kids at a very early age that the Aryan race was the best, and showing them how to be, I guess, rulers and commanders over the lesser people. This is the chimney of Crematorium 1. It's massive. It doesn't look huge from where it is, but I'm also taking it from a distance. This is where the majority of the Jews would have been taken at the very beginning of Auschwitz's beginning to be cremated and killed. This is inside the first crematorium and the gas chambers. This is what it looks like walking into it. It's very ominous now, but I'm sure at the time it actually looked a lot better because it was disguised as being a shower. When you first got to Auschwitz, they would tell you that you were going to take a shower just to clean up. They'd bring you into this room right down here, which is very poorly lit, but it is not much bigger than this classroom. But as I explained here, roughly 700 people could fit into this gas chamber at one time. They would just cram people until they could not move, essentially. Once that happened, they would turn the water on, and there's actually a hole at the very top of this building where they dropped the Zyklon B. And it would take, a couple of seconds before the entire group of people who was in there would suffocate. Then they would move to this picture on my left, which is the crematorium. I believe I stated in the handout that I've given you that I think it's close to over 4,000 people a day to be processed through the crematorium. Okay, this is what happens to all the German leaders who took place in Auschwitz. This is where they got killed, essentially. Once Auschwitz was destroyed, well, not fully destroyed, but at least liberated enough, and part of it was destroyed, and World War II was finished, the United States and many other cultures made it their job to go and find all the people who took place in the Holocaust and bring them back for trial. Once brought back, Rudolf Hess and multiple other officers were brought back to Auschwitz, tried, found guilty, and then hung on Auschwitz's area. I can't think of the name of it right now, but where they were hung faces the sign that says "Work will set you free," just to remind them that they worked, and so now they're going to be set free. Is why the prisoners wanted them hung there. The only person that was not hung here that was hugely involved in Auschwitz was Dr. Joseph Mengele, and that's because he was never found. He fled the country, and he originally went to, I think he went to Liberia first, then he went to Brazil. There was later notion that I think somebody ended up finding him, and he did get sent back to Germany. I think in 1965, I think is when he was eventually found and brought back to Germany for trial. But it was years after World War II had already happened before anybody even knew where he was. This is Birkenau. If anybody's ever seen the movie Schindler's List, this is where this is filmed. This is when you come into Schindler's List, this is the very typical scene of where you see the crossing, the two railroads party, and you have the commandant saying they're pointing left or right to which side they were going to go to. Once Birkenau was finished, this is where every single prisoner was transported at the beginning. The train tracks split and divide into two different sections. This is the famous scene where he gets to point different ways. If you got pointed right, you got to live for a time and work in the work camps. If you were pointed left, you were immediately taken and killed. The majority of the people who were killed at this time were women, especially pregnant women, children, too young to actually work in the labor camps, and any men who were too old to work in the labor camps or ill. They were immediately just taken, and you can't see it now, but there is a ditch on the far left side where they would just bring them and they would just shoot them in the back of the head, and then they would just burn the entire group of people afterwards. If you got put to the right, you were sent to the barracks. All these hundreds of barracks here, you were sent there to live and to eventually work out your time. The picture on the very bottom is all that we have left of Monowitz. There are these two very small towers off in the distance, these red and white towers right here, where the Monowitz camp was. Monowitz was a chemical plant that the Jews and other prisoners were forced to work in. The reason that that's all we have left is because when the Red Army, the Soviet Union, came through, they just destroyed it. They went through and just leveled that entire place, getting into Auschwitz. There's other places that they did destroy, but that was the only one that they fully just leveled completely. This is what it looks like inside of just one of these massive cells, is the best way I can describe it. It was able to hold up to 52 horses in the time of the original First World War when they were still using horses. This was a 52-horse stable. They then changed this into just rows and rows and rows of 3 stories of beds. Each one of these stories of the beds reached to the ceiling. It's how, just to give you a rough estimation of how tall these were. Okay, I do say it. It could fit up to 6 people per level. They would force each person to sleep on top of each other per level. So instead of having just one person a bunk, you just literally just lay people on top of each other until that was completely filled, nobody else could fit on it. Then the next level would get filled up, and then it would just go on there. These are the crematoriums. Well, what's left of the crematoriums that were in Birkenau. Birkenau was the death camp. You were there to live and to work, but it was the official death camp because it had hundreds of crematoriums on it. The most famous ones are in Auschwitz I, the ones that everybody thinks of when you think of the crematoriums are in Auschwitz I, but there were many ones that were all throughout Birkenau. There are electric fences that surround all of Auschwitz. Once you get into the camp of Auschwitz, there are electric fences that surround themselves everywhere. There's a lot of stories that were told by there were prisoners that were there since it was the anniversary, so that came back to Auschwitz to talk to us. A lot of people told that they had to come out every day and they had to count them. When they came out to count, a lot of them just gave up on life essentially, and they would actually throw themselves on these electric fences. They were barbed wire electric fences, so I'm not going to go into full detail what happened, but the way they explained it, it's pretty horrific. And anybody who's ever taken a science class and can guess about what happens with metal and high voltage, you can probably guess what happens when somebody throws their body onto something like this. It was the easiest way out. It was a quick way out. Instead of having to work to death, it went to be, thrown into a cyanide chamber, essentially. That's all I have. Does anybody have any questions before we get into the group discussion about anything that I talked about? One of the books that we're going to start reading in class is going to be the book Night by Elie Wiesel. I don't know if anybody's actually read that book before, but he is a survivor of Auschwitz, and he does give a very almost perfect description of what Auschwitz is like back in the day. He gives all the horrors, he explains everything. Everything I've talked about, he goes into great detail about. All right, so I'm actually going to have you split up into groups. I'm just going to have the girls sit up here and the guys are going to sit up here. There's a worksheet that I've given you, plus a handout. The worksheet, I should have gone over the majority of the answers, but the handout also has other answers. If y'all could just fill out the worksheet for me, then we'll come back to it in the bigger group and we'll start talking about it. I'll just walk around and I'll be able to answer any questions y'all have. Okay? All right. I mean, it's easy questions. questions? Things that I didn't go over that you need more clarified? Anything I didn't discuss should be on the handout that I've given you, but if not, you'll just comment over and ignore that. Any questions? You? Okay.
You want, I'm giving you some of Scott's time, but you're still going to want to wrap up pretty quickly.
Okay, yeah, definitely. Okay, so in real class time, you would have had, I would have let y'all finish first, but we're just gonna go ahead and get back and we're going to go into and just do a large group and just talk about some of the questions and some of the stuff that we went over. Okay, so just to go over stuff that I didn't discuss in the PowerPoint itself that I find that is actually important to go through. Y'all know who it's famous for having Jewish prisoners in the Holocaust. Everybody knows that the Jews were the ones, it was anti-Semitic, that's what the Holocaust was primarily about. Do you know who the rest of the victims were that were taken though? That Hitler saw as the unclean, unfit races? Gypsies. Some black people.
Little known fact, Unitarian Universalists.
I did not know that. All right. Prisoners of war were also a big one that were brought to the camp, especially Soviet Union prisoners of war. And homosexuals were the big ones that were taken into this camp. It's actually, most people think that, even though it was a prison camp, it was a starvation camp. So you would think that a lot of people would just kind of follow through with it. There was actually a rebellion. Does anybody know from what y'all read about the rebellion? Has everybody heard about the rebellions that happened, especially in Auschwitz, because it was one of the bigger ones that happened?
Isn't the book Animal Farm based off of
It's based on the Soviet Union. What
Soviet
happened.
Union?
Yes.
Because I knew that was about a rebellion taking over the German camp.
To go off the subject a little bit, it's off of a rebellion that happened in the Soviet Union to overthrow the Tsars and to take over into the new, what would become the Soviet Union.
Oh, okay.
But the rebellion happened in Auschwitz I itself, and it actually destroyed Crematorium 4 completely. The women who were allowed to go outside of the camp to work were able to find explosives and actually brought explosives back into the camp, and some of the rebellious men took them and they threw it into Crematorium 1 and just blew it to, it's gone. It completely leveled. There's nothing even left in Auschwitz itself today. Can anybody tell me exactly how many people were in Auschwitz itself? Roughly. I know it's a big number for the amount of people killed, but Auschwitz had the majority of the people. The majority of the deaths that we hear about that took place in Auschwitz itself. Roughly 60,000 prisoners were liberated from the camp, but it was just from the Jewish population, not including everybody together, it was close between 1.1 and 1.6 million people were killed, just Jewish. That leaves about roughly 2 million people were probably killed in Auschwitz altogether. And then the last thing I have is about Dr. Joseph Mengele. Does anybody know anything about Dr. Joseph Mengele? Scott.
Not really, no. Sorry.
Anybody, anything from any of the history class about Dr. Mengele? Dr. Mengele is actually where we get a lot of our science, a lot of our medical ideas and technology that we have today in today's world. A lot of what he did translates into what we know about the medical science today. The way he did it, though, was absolutely horrific. He took a lot of children, primarily twins, and children who had just little odd things about them, like photographic memories. Maybe they had one arm, maybe they couldn't see out of one eye. It was a lot of just weird things that he didn't understand. He took a lot of them and did massive experiments on them, and he did them all without anesthesia or anesthetic. He did it all while they were there, so he could feel the whole, so he could see everything that happened as it happened. He's famous, and especially in the book Night, to explain the amount of cruelty that he put on it. And his nickname became, at the very end of all of this, was the Angel of Death, became his nickname. All right, so this is all we're going to go over in class today. Make sure you bring the book Night and your textbook tomorrow, and we'll go over the rest of this tomorrow. Thank you.